So, what are their views? I think we've covered, but let's go into greater depth as to how they differ with Mr. Obama's, or I should say the Obama administration's views. When President Obama came into office, he came after the end of the Cold War with the Soviet Union. And the thinking then was the project ahead was no longer to compete militarily or even economically with Russia, but to, in fact, converge. It was the word that's become popular now. By converge, you find things where you can get agreement, and you increase membership in those things you can get agreement to. And the things that he focused on first was expanding NATO. And it's hard to believe, but back in the day, when NATO was expanded, there was some thought initially to bringing Russia into NATO. This did not work, but it was contemplated that NATO somehow would be all of Europe, not just the former Soviet Union, but the Soviet Union, now Russia as well. It went pretty far, as you can see in the bottom map. It got pretty far compared to where it was before the end of the Cold War lines. The other thing that was promoted were economic trade agreements and understandings, the most important of which was the World Trade Organization, and the membership became almost universal. As you can see, all but everyone, the non-participants were down to Iran and I guess 2 African countries, and North Korea. I mean, it's pretty good. And then, of course, what we care about the most. On April 5th, he gave his exegesis or explanation of where we should go with nuclear things, nuclear weapons. And he argued that ultimately we need to be much more enthusiastic and explicit about moving towards zero nuclear weapons everywhere in the world. And in this regard, he had some suggestions, some of which were quite traditional. Getting an agreement to a comprehensive test ban, reducing numbers. But he had a few new ideas. One was, well, we should at least make sure that everyone does something to secure the materials that might be diverted into nuclear weapons. Something, I might add, very easy to get agreement to. So we had New START, which was a modest reduction in the number of weapons deployed. And it was supposed to be the start of something more. Nothing really actually followed for a number of political reasons. One had to do with the US Senate being opposed to more arms control agreements, and the other was that the Soviet Union became more truculent. It was more difficult to reach agreements with them. The signature nuclear restraint effort, I suppose, were these security summits where the world's leaders got together and agreed that whatever else they might disagree about, we would at least try to secure whatever might be seized or otherwise turned into nuclear weapons. That's highly enriched uranium and, to a lesser extent, separated plutonium from being seized. And these events were occasioned by countries saying that they would send back the materials to the country that sent them the materials in the form of highly enriched uranium, mostly. But again, what you could get agreement to was subject to one fundamental constraint. If you gave a lot of information about where you had your material, it could be risky because you didn't want, A, the terrorists to know or your enemies to know. So the fidelity of what was agreed to was low. The intent was totally unobjectionable. I mean, how could you be against this? In any case, the book that sort of was behind all this, which I'm not sure everyone read, was this, by the way, this is a big problem. People in Washington don't read. By the way, the seditious activity you're engaged in on a daily basis, I assume, is opening those books. it's not encouraged when you get into the real world. But these things have a power that even the people who don't read them get pushed around by these ideas. So this book, The End of History and The Last Man, which was very popular in the 90s, saw its realization, I think, in the Obama administration.